The transport ship descended through purple clouds that wrapped around its hull like silk ribbons. Inside the cargo bay, Maya pressed her palm against the cold metal wall, feeling the vibrations of the engines through her fingertips. She had learned to read the world through touch and sight, through the subtle movements of air and the expressions people wore when they thought no one was watching. Her commanding officer stood 10 feet away, his mouth moving rapidly as he gestured toward the massive creature chained in the center of the bay. Maya didn't need to hear his words to understand his anger. The tension in his shoulders and the vein pulsing in his neck told her everything. Another rider had been rejected. That made 17 in the past month. The creature called Varathix was unlike anything Earth's databases had cataloged. His scales shifted between deep crimson and obsidian black, creating patterns that seemed to move even when he stood still. His wings, each one spanning 40 feet when fully extended, were currently folded tight against his body. 4 intelligent eyes arranged in pairs on either side of his elongated skull tracked every movement in the bay. Each eye held the depth of ancient stars, cold and calculating. Maya had read the reports during her 3-month journey from Earth. Varathix was a Draken, a species engineered by the Korvath Empire 10,000 years ago for a war that had consumed half the galaxy. When that empire fell, most Draken had died with it, but a few survived in deep stasis. The Alliance had discovered Varathix on a dead world, frozen in a chamber beneath miles of ice. They had awakened something they couldn't control. The Draken had strict rules about riders. They chose based on criteria no one understood. Strength meant nothing to them. Combat records earned no respect. Varathix had incinerated 3 riders who had tried to force dominance. He had paralyzed 2 others with his psychic scream, leaving them catatonic for weeks. The Alliance needed him desperately. The Zithoran invasion was pushing humanity and its allies to the brink of extinction. War dragons like Varathix could turn the tide of entire battles, but only if they accepted a rider. Maya watched as medical teams carried the latest rejected candidate past her on a stretcher. The man's skin had turned a sickly gray color and his eyes stared at nothing. She felt the brush of air as they hurried by, heading toward the medical bay. The commanding officer turned his glare on her next. His finger jabbed in her direction, then toward the dragon. His meaning was clear even without words. She was next. Maya had volunteered for this assignment 3 weeks ago, after the recruitment message had reached her unit on the frontier station. Most of her squadron had laughed when she indicated her interest. A deaf pilot trying to bond with a telepathic war dragon? The irony wasn't lost on anyone. But Maya had noticed something in the footage of Varathix that others had missed. In every rejection, in every violent refusal, the dragon's movements followed a pattern. He wasn't attacking randomly. He was communicating. She walked forward slowly, keeping her steps measured and her body language neutral. Varathix's 4 eyes locked onto her immediately, his massive head lowered, bringing his gaze level with hers. This close, she could see her reflection in his scales, distorted and small. His mouth parted slightly, revealing rows of teeth that could pierce ship armor. Hot breath washed over her, carrying scents of sulfur and electricity. Most riders tried to project confidence or dominance during first contact. They stood tall, met the dragon's gaze with unwavering stares, trying to prove their worth through force of personality. Maya did none of these things. Instead, she sat down cross-legged on the metal floor, making herself small and unthreatening. She placed her hands palm up on her knees and simply waited. Varathix's head tilted to one side, a gesture that seemed almost confused. His wings shifted slightly, creating shadows that danced across the bay walls. One of his clawed feet took a single step forward, then stopped. The chains that held him clinked softly, though Maya felt rather than heard the sound through the floor vibrations. She noticed the way his eyes moved. Not together, but independently, each pair taking in different details. His left pair focused on her face, while his right pair examined her hands and posture. She had read that Draken could sense electromagnetic fields, could taste fear in the air like humans taste salt. But there was something else in his gaze, something the reports hadn't mentioned. Loneliness. For 3 hours, Maya sat without moving. Personnel came and went around them. The commanding officer tried to pull her away twice, but she remained seated, her eyes never leaving Varathix's face. She watched the subtle changes in his expression, the minute shifts in his scales coloration, the way his breathing pattern changed from aggressive to curious. As the ship's artificial sunset began, Casting orange light through the bay windows, something remarkable happened. Varathix lowered himself onto his belly, his massive body settling with surprising grace. He stretched his neck forward until his snout was inches from Maya's face. His breath came slower now, almost gentle. One of his eyes closed halfway in what might have been a blink or might have been something else entirely. Maya slowly raised one hand, moving with deliberate care. She didn't reach for his head or try to touch him. Instead, she began to sign. Her fingers formed shapes and patterns, flowing from one gesture to another. She signed her name. She signed her gratitude for his patience. She signed that she understood what it meant to exist in a world where everyone expected you to communicate in ways that felt foreign and wrong. Varathix's eyes widened. All four of them simultaneously. His massive body went completely still. Then something unprecedented happened. Images flooded Maya's mind. Not words, not sounds, but pure concepts wrapped in emotion. She saw worlds burning. She felt the weight of thousands of years of sleep. She experienced the confusion of waking to find everything you knew turned to dust. She understood the frustration of beings who tried to dominate rather than connect. Tears streamed down Maya's face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming intimacy of true understanding. Varathix wasn't refusing riders because he was violent or uncontrollable. He was refusing them because none had tried to meet him as an equal. None had recognized that beneath the armor and the fire and the ancient engineering, he was fundamentally alone. She signed again, simpler this time. One concept. Friend. Varathix's response came not in images, but in a feeling that settled into her chest like warm light. Acceptance. The chains that bound him began to glow red, then white. They melted away, not from external heat but from his own power finally released by choice rather than force. He stood, his full height reaching nearly 30 feet, and extended one wing toward Maya. An invitation. The bay erupted into chaos. Alarms blared silently in Maya's world while personnel scrambled. But Maya felt through the floor that the ship's commander was giving different orders now. Not orders to restrain, but orders to prepare, because everyone watching understood what they were witnessing. After 17 failures and countless casualties, humanity had finally found Varathix's rider. Maya stood and placed her hand on the offered wing. Scales that could deflect plasma fire felt smooth and warm under her palm. She felt Varathix's heartbeat through the contact, steady and strong. In that moment, a bond formed that would change the course of the war. Training began the next morning in a facility built specifically for War Dragon integration. The massive hangar stretched 300 meters in every direction, with reinforced walls designed to withstand sustained plasma bombardment. Maya stood in the center, wearing the neural interface suit that would theoretically enhance communication between rider and dragon. Most riders needed the technology to achieve even basic coordination. Maya suspected she and Varathix wouldn't need it at all. The training officer was a Velcron named Ashkor, a 7-foot-tall being with blue chitinous skin and compound eyes that could process information at speeds human brains couldn't match. His species had been the first to successfully bond with the ancient war dragons after their rediscovery. He approached Maya with obvious skepticism, his forearms carrying various pieces of equipment that she would supposedly need. Ashkor's mandibles clicked in a pattern that the translator on Maya's wrist converted to text. The standard protocol requires 6 months of ground training before first flight. We will begin with basic trust exercises. His doubt was evident in every gesture. He had trained 16 previous candidates for Varathix. All had failed before reaching the flight stage. Maya glanced at Varathix, who had positioned himself at the far end of the hangar. His eyes tracked her constantly, and she felt the now familiar warmth of his presence in her mind. It wasn't words or even images anymore. It was deeper than that. Like sharing the same heartbeat, she could sense his amusement at the training officer's caution. The dragon understood protocols and procedures. He had lived through empires that rose and fell on rigid military structure. But he also understood that what he and Maya had wasn't something that could be trained into existence. She signed to Ashkor, her translator speaking the words aloud. With respect, I believe we can accelerate the timeline. Before the officer could respond, Maya walked toward Varathix. The dragon lowered his massive body, extending his foreleg to create a natural stairway to his back. The riding harness that technicians had spent days installing sat unused. Maya didn't need it. She climbed onto his back, finding handholds in the natural ridges of his scales. The moment she settled into position at the base of his neck, between his shoulder blades where 4 smaller horns created a natural seat, everything changed. The bond that had been warm and comfortable suddenly blazed into brilliant clarity. She wasn't just sitting on Varathix. She was part of him. His wings became her arms. His tail became an extension of her spine. When he tensed his muscles to spring into the air, she felt the coiling power as if it were her own. They launched upward with explosive force. The hangar's ceiling opened automatically, sensing their ascent. Clouds rushed past as they climbed through atmosphere layers at speeds that would have torn apart any normal aircraft. Maya felt no fear. Varathix banked left then right, testing her balance and trust. She moved with him instinctively, her body flowing with his movements like water adapting to its container. Far below, Ashkor and his training team stared upward through observation screens, their prepared lesson plans forgotten. The telemetry data streaming from Maya's suit showed synchronization rates that shouldn't have been possible. Her neural patterns and Varathix's were overlapping in ways that suggested complete integration. Most riders achieved 30% synchronization after months of training. Maya and Varathix were operating at 97% after less than 60 seconds of flight. In the sky above the training facility, Maya experienced true freedom for the first time in her life. On Earth, her deafness had always created barriers. People spoke too quickly for her to read their lips. They forgot to face her during conversations. They treated her as less capable despite her perfect academy scores and combat record. But up here with Varathix, those barriers didn't exist. Their communication transcended sound. It transcended words entirely. They understood each other through pure intention and feeling. Varathix sent her an image of a distant mountain range, jagged peaks cutting through cloud layers. Maya felt his desire to fly there, to feel wind rushing over ancient stone. She sent back agreement wrapped in excitement. The dragon's joy exploded through their bond like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. His wings beat faster, and they accelerated toward the mountains at hypersonic speeds. They spent hours exploring the landscape together. Varathix showed Maya how he perceived the world through multiple spectrums of light. She saw electromagnetic fields flowing around the planet like rivers. She saw the heat signatures of animals hidden in forests far below. She saw the crystalline beauty of ice formations on distant peaks that reflected starlight in colors human eyes couldn't normally detect. Through him, she experienced reality in dimensions her species had never evolved to witness. In return, Maya shared her memories with him. She showed him Earth, the blue-green world where humanity had taken its first stumbling steps toward the stars. She showed him the sign language her mother had taught her, each gesture carrying weight and meaning that spoken words often lacked. She showed him the moment she had first seen his image in the recruitment files and had known, with absolute certainty, that they were meant to find each other. Varathix responded with memories of his own. She saw the Korvath Empire in its glory, vast cities floating in space connected by bridges of solid light. She witnessed the war that had created his species, the desperate measures taken by beings facing extinction. She felt the pride Draken had taken in their purpose, and the bitter emptiness when that purpose had been stripped away by the collapse of everything they knew. She experienced his millennia of sleep, dreaming of skies he thought he would never see again. When they finally returned to the training facility, the sun was setting in spectacular arrays of orange and purple. Maya guided Varathix into a landing that was gentler than a falling leaf. The dragon settled onto the hangar floor with barely a sound, his movements controlled and precise. Maya dismounted, her legs shaky from hours of flight but her face glowing with exhilaration. Ashkor approached cautiously, his equipment forgotten. His translator couldn't quite capture the emotion in his clicking mandibles, but Maya read it in his posture. Respect, wonder, perhaps even a touch of fear. He had trained dragon riders for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like what he had just witnessed. That night, Maya sat in her assigned quarters, reviewing the day's flight data on her tablet. The statistics were impressive, but they didn't capture the truth of what flying with Varathix meant. Numbers couldn't measure the sensation of two souls moving as one. Graphs couldn't display the joy of perfect understanding. Reports couldn't explain why a war dragon, engineered for destruction, and a deaf, human girl from Earth's agricultural colonies had formed a bond that defied every expectation and protocol. A soft vibration through the floor alerted her to movement outside. Maya opened her door to find Varathix's massive head waiting in the corridor, too large to fit through the entrance. His eyes glowed softly in the dim lighting. She felt his question without words. Was she comfortable? Did she need anything? Was she happy? Maya signed her response, knowing he would understand even though her hands were too small for him to easily see. Yes to all three questions. She added another sign, one she had created specifically for him. Home. Because that was what Varathix had become in less than 2 days. Not a mount or a weapon or an assignment. Home. The dragon's contentment flowed through their bond like warm honey. He settled outside her door, a guardian who would need no sleep, watching over the one person in all the galaxy who truly understood him. Tomorrow would bring weapons training and tactical exercises. Tomorrow they would begin preparing for the war that threatened all sentient life. But tonight, a girl and a dragon simply rested together, two unlikely friends who had found family in the vast emptiness of space. The combat simulation room recreated battlefield conditions with disturbing accuracy. Holographic Zytheran fighters swarmed through artificial clouds, their twisted organic ships pulsing with bioluminescent weapons. Maya felt Varathix's muscles tense beneath her as they dove into the scenario. The dragon's hunting instincts, dormant for thousands of years, awakened with frightening intensity. 3 weeks had passed since their first flight. In that time, they had shattered every training record the Alliance maintained. What should have taken 6 months of gradual progression had been compressed into a blur of constant practice and refinement. Ashkor had stopped trying to slow them down after the first week. Even he recognized that some bonds defied traditional training methodology. The first wave of enemy fighters broke formation to engage them. Varathix responded with tactics Maya hadn't taught him because she didn't know them herself. He rolled inverted and climbed vertically while simultaneously firing controlled bursts of plasma from his throat. The holographic enemies dissolved into scattered light particles. Through their bond, Maya felt his satisfaction at the hunt, tempered by his awareness that these were only simulations. He wanted real combat. His species had been engineered for it, and that purpose still sang in his blood. Maya understood his hunger but also felt concern. The Zytheran weren't like the enemies Varathix had fought in his previous life. They didn't operate on logic or strategy that other species recognized. They were a hive consciousness that spread through space like disease, consuming and converting everything they touched. Captured worlds became twisted amalgamations of organic technology that defied natural law. Entire populations disappeared into the hive's collective mind, their individual identities erased. A second wave materialized around them, this time including Zytheran heavy cruisers. These massive vessels resembled deep-sea creatures more than spacecraft, with translucent sections that revealed pulsing internal organs and veins flowing with corrosive chemicals. Their weapons weren't mounted externally but grew from the ships themselves, living cannons that fired projectiles which actively hunted their targets. Varathix's response was immediate and brutal. He unleashed his full arsenal of abilities that ancient Korvath genetic engineers had coded into his DNA. Electromagnetic pulses rolled off his scales, disrupting the holographic enemy's guidance systems. His tail, tipped with a blade made of crystallized energy, severed fighter wings with surgical precision. When a cruiser attempted to ensnare him with bioorganic tentacles, he incinerated them with plasma hot enough to melt titanium. But it was the psychic scream that truly demonstrated his deadly nature. Varathix opened his mouth and released a weapon that existed in dimensions beyond the physical. Maya felt the attack pass through her harmlessly, filtered by their bond, but watched it devastate the simulated enemies. Zytheran vessels convulsed and tore themselves apart as the scream disrupted their hive connection. In actual combat, that weapon could disable an entire enemy formation in seconds. The simulation ended with every enemy destroyed and Varathix barely damaged. The dragon landed in the center of the chamber, his breathing heavy but controlled. Maya dismounted and immediately noticed the attention their performance had attracted. The observation deck above them was crowded with Alliance military officers, their various species united in their stunned silence. Among them stood Admiral Kesthrix, Supreme Commander of the Alliance's Third Fleet. The Admiral was human, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and scars that mapped a lifetime of combat. She descended from the observation deck with deliberate steps, her eyes never leaving Maya and Varathix. When she reached the combat floor, she stood before them for a long moment, studying them with an intensity that made Maya's spine straighten. The Admiral's hands moved in sign language, fluid and practiced. My daughter is deaf. I learned to sign before she could walk. Her expression softened slightly. I've watched your progress, Rider Maya. The Alliance has waited 10 years for someone to bond with Vorathics. We'd begun to believe it was impossible. Maya signed back, her translator speaking for those watching. He was waiting for someone who would listen rather than command, Admiral. Kesthrix nodded slowly. The Zitharan are 3 days from the Terminus system. We have 12 colonies there with a combined population of 800 million. Our defensive fleet is outmatched 4-1. She paused, letting the weight of those numbers settle. We need every advantage. We need you. Vorathix stirred, his massive presence filling the space. Maya felt his eagerness mixed with caution. He wanted to fight, to prove his worth, but he also sensed Maya's fear. Not fear of battle, but fear of inadequacy. She was 23 years old, had been flying with Vorathix for less than a month, and now an admiral was asking her to help defend hundreds of millions of lives. Through their bond, Vorathix sent her memories of his first real battle thousands of years ago. He had been young then, too, by Draken standards, barely out of his growth phase. His first rider had been terrified as well, a Korvath warrior who had trembled against his scales as they approached an enemy fleet. But fear and courage weren't opposites. They were partners. Fear showed what mattered. Courage was choosing to act despite it. Maya looked up at the Admiral and signed firmly. When do we depart? The next 2 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Maya met with tactical specialists who briefed her on Zitharan attack patterns. She studied 3-dimensional star maps of the Terminus system until she could navigate every orbital path from memory. Technicians installed military-grade communication equipment that would allow her to coordinate with fleet elements during battle. Sophisticated systems that converted audio communications to visual displays in her helmet. Vorathix underwent his own preparations. Alliance weapons engineers had developed specialized ordnance for war dragons, munitions that integrated with their natural abilities, plasma lances that could be mounted along his spine, antimatter charges that could be deployed from his tail, energy shields that would enhance his already formidable natural defenses. The dragon tolerated their modifications with patient dignity. Though Maya felt his amusement at humanity's need to improve on Korvath engineering that had been perfected millennia ago. On the second night, Maya couldn't sleep. She found herself in the hangar where Vorathix rested, his massive form illuminated by maintenance lights. She climbed onto his back and lay against his neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. Through their bond, she shared her doubts. What if she made mistakes? What if her commands got people killed? What if she wasn't ready? Vorathix responded not with reassurance, but with truth. She would make mistakes. People might die because of her decisions. She wasn't ready, not completely. No one ever was. But she had something that readiness alone couldn't provide. She had him. They had each other. And that bond, forged between a deaf human girl and an ancient war dragon, was stronger than any weapon the Alliance could manufacture. Maya felt tears slide down her face, but they weren't tears of fear anymore. They were tears of gratitude. She had spent her entire life being told she was limited by her deafness, that she would never pilot fighters because she couldn't hear radio communications clearly enough, that she would never command because she couldn't follow verbal orders in the chaos of battle. Yet here she was, bonded to the most powerful war machine in known space, preparing to defend 800 million lives. The morning of departure arrived with brutal efficiency. The fleet assembled in high orbit, 37 warships of varying classes surrounded by hundreds of smaller support vessels. At the formation center flew the flagship Indomitable, where Admiral Kesthrix commanded from a bridge that coordinated thousands of personnel. And flying point position, ahead of even the Vanguard destroyers, were Maya and Vorathix. The jump to the Terminus system would take 6 hours through hyperspace. Maya used that time to meditate, centering herself through techniques she had learned during her pilot training. Vorathix rested in a state that was neither sleep nor wakefulness, conserving energy for the battle to come. Their bond hummed quietly between them, a constant connection that required no maintenance or effort. When they emerged from hyperspace, the Terminus system spread before them in all its besieged beauty. The star at its center burned orange-red, ancient and stable. 12 planets orbited in carefully calculated paths, 4 of them hosting human colonies protected by planetary shields. And between the fleet and those colonies hung the enemy. The Zitharan armada defied description. Thousands of organic vessels clustered together like a swarm of deep-sea predators, their bioluminescent weapons creating a light show that was beautiful and terrifying. At the formation's center lurked something that made even Vorathix pause. A hive ship the size of a small moon, its surface crawling with movement, birthing new fighters even as the Alliance fleet watched. Admiral Kestrix's message appeared on Maya's helmet display. All units engage at will. Dragon Rider, you are authorized to attack priority targets at your discretion. Show them why humanity doesn't surrender. Maya felt Vorathix's wings beat once, twice, building momentum. She leaned forward against his neck, their hearts beating in synchronization. Through their bond, she felt his battle fury rising. Controlled. Maya dismounted and immediately noticed the attention their performance had attracted. The observation deck above them was crowded with Alliance military officers, their various species united in their stunned silence. Among them stood Admiral Kestrix, Supreme Commander of the Alliance's Third Fleet. The Admiral was human, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and scars that mapped a lifetime of combat. She descended from the observation deck with deliberate steps, her eyes never leaving Maya and Vorathix. When she reached the combat floor, she stood before them for a long moment, studying them with an intensity that made Maya's spine straighten. The Admiral's hands moved in sign language, fluid and practiced. My daughter is deaf. I learned to sign before she could walk. Her expression softened slightly. I've watched your progress, Rider Maya. The Alliance has waited 10 years for someone to bond with Vorathix. We'd begun to believe it was impossible. Maya signed back, her translator speaking for those watching. He was waiting for someone who would listen rather than command, Admiral. Kestrix nodded slowly. The Zitharan are 3 days from the Terminus system. We have 12 colonies there with a combined population of 800 million. Our defensive fleet is outmatched 4-1. She paused, letting the weight of those numbers settle. We need every advantage. We need you. Vorathix stirred, his massive presence filling the space. Maya felt his eagerness mixed with caution. He wanted to fight to prove his worth, but he also sensed Maya's fear. Not fear of battle, but fear of inadequacy. She was 23 years old, had been flying with Vorathix for less than a month, and now an admiral was asking her to help defend hundreds of millions of lives. Through their bond, Vorathix sent her memories of his first real battle thousands of years ago. He had been young then too, by Draken standards, barely out of his growth phase. His first rider had been terrified as well, a Korvath warrior who had trembled against his scales as they approached an enemy fleet. But fear and courage weren't opposites. They were partners. Fear showed what mattered. Courage was choosing to act despite it. Maya looked up at the Admiral and signed firmly. When do we depart? The next 2 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Maya met with tactical specialists who briefed her on Zitharan attack patterns. She studied 3-dimensional star maps of the Terminus system until she could navigate every orbital path from memory. Technicians installed military-grade communication equipment that would allow her to coordinate with fleet elements during battle. Sophisticated systems that converted audio communications to visual displays in her helmet. Vorathix underwent his own preparations. Alliance weapons engineers had developed specialized ordnance for war dragons, munitions that integrated with their natural abilities, plasma lances that could be mounted along his spine, antimatter charges that could be deployed from his tail, energy shields that would enhance his already formidable natural defenses. The dragon tolerated their modifications with patient dignity, though Maya felt his amusement at humanity's need to improve on Korvath engineering that had been perfected millennia ago. On the second night, Maya couldn't sleep. She found herself in the hangar where Vorathix rested, his massive form illuminated by maintenance lights. She climbed onto his back and lay against his neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. Through their bond, she shared her doubts. What if she made mistakes? What if her commands got people killed? What if she wasn't ready? Vorathix responded not with reassurance but with truth. She would make mistakes. People might die because of her decisions. She wasn't ready, not completely. No one ever was. But she had something that readiness alone couldn't provide. She had him. They had each other. And that bond, forged between a deaf human girl and an ancient war dragon, was stronger than any weapon the Alliance could manufacture. Maya felt tears slide down her face, but they weren't tears of fear anymore. They were tears of gratitude. She had spent her entire life being told she was limited by her deafness, that she would never pilot fighters because she couldn't hear radio communications clearly enough, that she would never command because she couldn't follow verbal orders in the chaos of battle. Yet here she was, bonded to the most powerful war machine in known space, preparing to defend 800 million lives. The morning of departure arrived with brutal efficiency. The fleet assembled in high orbit, 37 warships of varying classes surrounded by hundreds of smaller support vessels. At the formations center flew the flagship Indomitable, where Admiral Kesthrix commanded from a bridge that coordinated thousands of personnel. And flying point position, ahead of even the Vanguard destroyers, were Maya and Verathix. The jump to the Terminus system would take 6 hours through hyperspace. Maya used that time to meditate, centering herself through techniques she had learned during her pilot training. Verathix rested in a state that was neither sleep nor wakefulness, conserving energy for the battle to come. Their bond hummed quietly between them, a constant connection that required no maintenance or effort. When they emerged from hyperspace, the Terminus system spread before them in all its besieged beauty. The star at its center burned orange-red, ancient and stable. 12 planets orbited in carefully calculated paths, 4 of them hosting human colonies protected by planetary shields. And between the fleet and those colonies hung the enemy. The Zitharan armada defied description. Thousands of organic vessels clustered together like a swarm of deep-sea predators, their bioluminescent weapons creating a light show that was beautiful and terrifying. At the formation center lurked something that made even Verathix pause. A hive ship the size of a small moon, its surface crawling with movement, birthing new fighters even as the Alliance fleet watched. Admiral Kestrix's message appeared on Maya's helmet display. All units engage at will. Dragon Rider, you are authorized to attack priority targets at your discretion. Show them why humanity doesn't surrender. Maya felt Verathix's wings beat once, twice, building momentum. She leaned forward against his neck, their hearts beating in synchronization. Through their bond, she felt his battle fury rising, controlled and focused. And beneath that fury, she felt his love for her, steady and unshakable. She signed against his scales, knowing he would feel the gesture. Let's show them what we can do. Verathix roared, a sound that carried through the vacuum of space on psychic frequencies, and they dove toward the enemy swarm. The Battle of Terminus had begun. The first Zitharan fighter exploded into fragments of chitin and biomatter. As Verathix's plasma breath caught it mid-turn, Maya felt the kill through their bond, not as triumph but as grim necessity. The dragon wasn't celebrating. He was calculating. 30 more fighters closing from above, 50 from the port side. A heavy cruiser charging weapons directly ahead. Maya's tactical display painted the battlefield in layers of information her eyes tracked automatically. Fleet units shown in blue, enemies in red, trajectory predictions in yellow, but the display couldn't capture what she felt through Verathix. The electromagnetic signatures of Zitharan bioweapons charging, the subtle shifts in enemy formation that revealed attack patterns. The hive mind's coordinated consciousness flowing through space like invisible currents. Her bond with the dragon gave her awareness beyond technology. Verathix rolled inverted and accelerated past the cruiser's firing angle. The vessel's organic cannons tracked too slowly, evolved for different prey. As they passed beneath its bulk, the dragon's tail blade carved a line across its underbelly. Bioluminescent fluid sprayed into vacuum, freezing instantly into crystalline fragments. The cruiser convulsed but didn't die. Zitharan vessels were resilient, able to seal breaches and regenerate damage at speeds that frustrated conventional weapons. A warning flashed on Maya's display. Alliance destroyer Valiant was taking heavy fire, its shields down to 18%. 3 Zitharan fighters had latched onto its hull like parasites, drilling through armor with acid secretions. The destroyer's point defense systems couldn't target enemies that close without risking damage to its own structure. Maya tapped commands into her wrist interface, sending course data to Verathix. The dragon responded instantly, banking hard toward the embattled destroyer. They closed the distance in seconds, building velocity until the stars blurred. At the last possible moment, Verathix spread his wings to break and Maya triggered the plasma lances mounted along his spine. 6 beams of superheated energy lanced out with surgical precision. The fighters attached to Valiant's hull never knew what killed them. They simply ceased to exist, vaporized so completely that not even their psychic echoes remained in the hive consciousness. The destroyer's captain sent a text message of thanks that appeared on Maya's display. She had already moved on, seeking the next threat. The battle developed into chaos that would have overwhelmed human commanders, but Varathix had fought in wars before sound was invented. His mind processed combat in 3 dimensions simultaneously, tracking hundreds of variables without conscious thought. Through their bond, Maya experienced combat as he did, not as a series of individual threats, but as a flowing dance where every movement created opportunities, and every opportunity demanded instant exploitation. They fought for an hour straight, never landing, barely slowing. Varathix's endurance was superhuman, a product of Korvath engineering that had designed war dragons to fight for days without rest. Maya's body was less durable, but adrenaline and the bond kept her sharp. She could feel fatigue in her muscles and the beginning ache behind her eyes. But these sensations felt distant, unimportant compared to the immediate demands of survival. The tide of battle shifted when Alliance carrier Thunderhead launched its full complement of fighters. 200 small craft screamed into the engagement zone, their pilots coordinating with practiced efficiency. The Zithoran swarm, which had been pressing the defensive perimeter, found itself caught between the carrier's fighters and the heavier fleet units. Maya watched formations collapse into individual dogfights, the organized invasion degrading into desperate survival. But the hive ship remained untouched at the center of enemy lines, protected by layers of defenders. Admiral Kesthrix's flagship was trading fire with Zithoran heavy units, unable to push forward without exposing itself to overwhelming firepower. The stalemate was unsustainable. Every minute the hive ship remained active, it birthed more fighters. Eventually, numbers would overwhelm even the best tactics. Maya felt Varathix's attention focus on the massive vessel. Through their bond came a question without words. Could they reach it? The answer was complex. Yes, physically they could penetrate the defensive screen. Varathix was faster and more maneuverable than anything the Zithoran fielded. But reaching the hive ship and surviving the return were different problems. The concentration of bioweapons near that vessel would tear apart even a war dragon if given enough time. A new message appeared from Admiral Kesthrix. Dragon Rider, we're preparing a coordinated assault on the hive ship. Wait for the signal. The Admiral understood combined arms tactics. She wanted to use the fleet's firepower to create an opening that Maya and Varathix could exploit. But Maya saw something the Admiral couldn't. Through Varathix's enhanced senses, she perceived the hive ship's vulnerability. Its defenses were strongest along its equator where the most weapons concentrated. But the poles, where new fighters were gestating in massive organic bays, were relatively unprotected. The Zithoran hive mind had made a tactical error, assuming no enemy would be foolish enough to approach from above or below through the ship's berthing fields. They would be wrong. Maya didn't request permission. She couldn't afford the delay that discussion would create. Instead, she sent her flight plan directly to the Admiral's tactical officer with a single-word message. Trust. Then Varathix climbed. They burned straight up relative to the battle plane, accelerating past the engagement zone into empty space. Alliance forces watched in confusion. Enemy targeting systems tracked their ascent but didn't pursue, interpreting the climb as a retreat. Let them think that. Maya had learned from her deafness that being underestimated was often an advantage. When they reached sufficient altitude, Varathix rolled and dove. They fell toward the hive ship like a meteor, building velocity to speeds that made the dragon's shields flare with friction against space dust. At this speed, even micrometeorites became deadly. At this speed, they became a weapon themselves. The hive ship's upper pole rushed toward them, swollen berthing chambers visible like tumors on its surface. Fighter larvae swam in translucent sacs, not yet mature enough to launch. Maya felt Varathix's targeting instincts lock onto those chambers. Destroy the nurseries and the ship's production capacity would plummet. They struck the surface at hypersonic velocity. Varathix didn't slow. Instead, he spread his claws and raked through organic armor, his momentum carrying them deep into the ship's interior. Bioluminescent fluid sprayed around them. The dragon's plasma breath ignited atmosphere within the berthing chambers, creating explosions that rippled through connected sections. For 10 seconds, they carved a path of destruction through the hive ship's body. The vessel screamed. a psychic wail that made Maya's skull throb despite her deafness. Varathix felt the pain through the hive consciousness and used it, following the loudest signals to find the most vital systems. His claws tore through neural clusters. His tail blades severed major arteries that pumped chemicals through the ship's living systems. Then they burst out the opposite side, trailing debris and fluid. Alarms cascaded across Maya's display as Varathix's shields took damage from internal explosions they'd triggered. But they were clear, and behind them the massive hive ship was dying. Its surface rippled with secondary detonations. Sections of its hull collapsed inward as support structures failed. The steady stream of new fighters launching from its bays sputtered and stopped. The Zytheran swarm reacted with predictable fury. Every enemy unit within range turned toward them, abandoning tactical objectives in favor of vengeance. The hive consciousness wanted them dead more than it wanted victory. Maya smiled grimly. Good. Angry enemies made mistakes. Varathix led the swarm on a chase through the debris field of destroyed ships. He wove between tumbling hull sections and frozen corpses, using the battlefield's chaos as camouflage. Alliance fighters saw what was happening and adjusted their tactics, cutting off Zytheran pursuit vectors and isolating enemy units. The swarm was fracturing, its coordination breaking down as the dying hive ship's influence weakened. Admiral Kesthrix's flagship pushed forward, its massive cannons firing in coordinated salvos. Other Alliance vessels followed, sensing victory's possibility. The defensive perimeter that had been slowly collapsing suddenly stabilized and began to advance. What had been a desperate defense transformed into a counterattack. Maya guided Varathix back toward the main battle line, conserving the dragon's energy. They had done what was needed. The hive ship was destroyed, its psychic influence fading like smoke. Without that central coordination, the Zytheran swarm was just a collection of dangerous animals rather than a unified threat. The Alliance fleet knew how to handle dangerous animals. 3 more hours of fighting followed, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Enemy units fought with individual desperation rather than collective intelligence. They were destroyed in pieces, isolated and overwhelmed. By the time the battle ended, the Zytheran invasion force had been reduced to scattered survivors fleeing into deep space. Maya slumped against Varathix's neck as the adrenaline faded from her system. Every muscle ached. Her eyes burned from hours of intense focus. Blood from a bitten lip had dried on her chin. But they were alive. The 12 colonies were safe. 800 million people would wake up tomorrow because a girl and a dragon had refused to accept impossible odds. Varathix's fatigue mirrored her own. His wings beat with slower, heavier rhythm as they returned to the Indomitable. The dragon's scales were scorched in places, his shields depleted, but he had suffered no serious damage. Korvath engineering had proven its worth across 10,000 years. As they landed in the flagship's hangar, Maya saw the welcome party waiting. Admiral Kesthrix stood at the front, her face showing emotions that military discipline usually concealed. Pride, relief, and something that looked like wonder. Behind her, hundreds of crew members lined the hangar deck, drawn by news of the Dragon Rider's impossible attack run. Maya dismounted on unsteady legs. Varathix lowered his head toward her, and she pressed her forehead against his snout in a gesture that had become their private ritual. Through their bond flowed emotions too complex for words or even images. Gratitude, respect, love, the kind of love that forms between soldiers who have fought together and know they would die for each other without hesitation. The Admiral approached and signed simply, "Thank you." 2 words that carried the weight of 800 million lives. Maya signed back, too exhausted for eloquence. "We're just getting started." Victory at Terminus made Maya and Varathix famous across Alliance space. News networks displayed footage of their attack run on the hive ship, slowing it down to capture details that human eyes had missed during real-time combat. Military analysts studied their tactics in war colleges. Children drew pictures of the dragon and his rider, imagining themselves as heroes. Maya hated every second of the attention. She sat in a conference room aboard the Indomitable, 3 days after the battle, watching diplomats and politicians argue about strategy she barely understood. They spoke about resource allocation and political capital, while she thought about the Alliance fighter pilot who had died covering their approach to the hive ship. His name had been Lieutenant Chen. He was 26. He had transmitted a farewell message to his husband seconds before a Zytheran fighter tore his craft apart. Maya had received the transmission as text on her display. She hadn't been able to save him. Admiral Kesthrix sat beside her, occasionally signing translations of particularly important points, though the translators built into the conference table were adequate. The meeting was ostensibly about future deployment strategies, but Maya recognized the real purpose. These people wanted to turn her and Varathix into symbols, icons for propaganda broadcasts, recruitment posters. They wanted to package lightning and sell it to a terrified population desperate for hope. A Velkron ambassador named Thexrin, his blue chitin gleaming under artificial lights, gestured with multiple arms as he spoke. The psychological impact of the Dragon Rider cannot be understated. Morale across frontier worlds has increased measurably since the Terminus victory. We should capitalize on this momentum with a publicity tour of key systems. Maya's hands moved sharply, her translator speaking with an edge that matched her expression. Soldiers don't win wars by visiting planets and shaking hands. They win by fighting. Thexrin's compound eyes fixed on her with insectoid intensity. Soldiers also need supplies, reinforcements, and public support for the war effort. Those things come from motivated populations. Your presence can motivate. Before Maya could respond, the conference room's lights flickered. A psychic pressure filled the space, subtle but unmistakable. Through the walls, through the deck plating, through the very air itself, Varathix made his opinion known. The dragon was in the hangar bay 4 levels below, but his irritation touched everyone in the room like a cold wind. Admiral Kesthrix suppressed a smile. She signed to Maya. Your partner seems to share your feelings about publicity tours. The conference dissolved into awkward dismissal after that. No one wanted to continue planning celebrations while an ancient war dragon radiated disapproval through the ship's superstructure. Maya escaped to the hangar bay with relief that made her muscles loosen. Varathix waited for her, his massive form creating shadows that stretched across the deck. Maintenance crews worked at a respectful distance, performing routine checks on his scales and wing membranes. The dragon tolerated their attention with patient dignity, but clearly preferred Maya's presence. His 4 eyes tracked her approach with focus that made her feel seen in ways that went beyond physical sight. She climbed onto his back and lay against his neck, feeling his warmth seep into her tired body. Through their bond came his concern for her well-being. She had barely slept since the battle. Nightmares jerked her awake every few hours, replaying the moment Lieutenant Chen's fighter had exploded. In her dreams, she could hear his final transmission, which was impossible because she was deaf. But the mind created sounds for significant moments, filling in gaps that reality left empty. Varathix shared his own memories of post-battle trauma. He had lived 10,000 years, fought in hundreds of engagements, and killed more beings than Maya could conceptualize. Every death left marks that time never fully erased. Warriors carried their fallen with them. The only dishonor was forgetting them. Lieutenant Chen deserved to be remembered. His sacrifice mattered. Maya's grief proved that. They stayed like that for hours, Dragon and Rider processing the weight of survival. Other crew members passed through the hangar but gave them distance, recognizing that some moments required solitude even in crowded spaces. Eventually, Maya slept against Varathix's scales, her dreams gentler under his protective presence. She woke to alarms that pulsed through the ship's systems. Her helmet display activated automatically, painting the hangar an emergency red. Text scrolled across her vision. All combat personnel to stations. Scytherin attack on the frontier colony detected. Multiple civilian ships destroyed. Rescue operation underway. Maya was moving before full consciousness returned. Varathix needed no explanation. Already preparing for launch with muscles tensing beneath his scales. The hangar bay doors opened, revealing star-scattered space beyond. They launched into the void while other pilots were still running to their fighters. The transit to the frontier colony took 30 minutes at maximum speed, Varathix pushing his limits to reach survivors before Scytherin forces could finish what they'd started. Maya's display showed the tactical situation updating in real time, as long-range sensors fed information to her systems. The attack had been sudden and brutal. A small Scytherin raiding force had bypassed frontier defenses and struck civilian shipping lanes directly. 17 transports destroyed, casualties estimated in the thousands. But some ships had survived. Maya's sensors detected 3 transports limping toward the colony on damaged engines, pursued by 8 Scytherin fighters. The transports couldn't outrun their hunters, and colony defenses were too far away to provide support. Without intervention, those civilians had minutes to live. Varathix accelerated harder, his body becoming a missile aimed at the distant engagement. Maya felt his battle focus sharpen to a cutting edge. The dragon wasn't thinking about tactics or strategy. He was thinking about protection, about defense, about standing between monsters and the helpless. That instinct had been engineered into him by Korvath creators who believed warriors should serve rather than dominate. They entered weapons range at hypersonic speeds, giving the Zythran no time to react. Varathix's plasma breath caught two fighters in a stream of superheated death. His tailblade bisected a third. Maya triggered the plasma lances, their beams lancing through vacuum to reduce two more enemies to expanding clouds of debris. 5 kills in less than 7 seconds. The remaining 3 Zithoran broke off pursuit and scattered, their hive intelligence recognizing a superior predator. Varathix ignored them. His attention locked onto the damaged transports, scanning for hull breaches and failing systems. Through their bond, Maya felt him calculating rescue priorities based on damage severity and passenger counts. The lead transport was venting atmosphere through a massive hull breach in its port side. Its emergency bulkheads had failed, leaving half the ship exposed to vacuum. Maya's sensors detected life signs in the sealed sections, but those signs were weakening as oxygen depleted. The transport's distress beacon transmitted automated messages requesting immediate assistance. Maya contacted the colony's rescue coordinator, her messages sent as text rather than voice. Dragon Rider on scene. 3 transports with survivors, requesting emergency medical teams and repair drones. The response came within seconds, confirmation that resources were en route, but would need 15 minutes to arrive. 15 minutes those transports didn't have. Varathix moved alongside the most damaged vessel, his massive form dwarfing the transport. Maya felt his concentration as he assessed the situation with senses that perceived reality in spectrums humans couldn't access. He detected the exact locations of trapped survivors, the structural integrity of compromised sections, the optimal approach vectors for rescue operations. Then the dragon did something Maya had never seen before. His scales began to glow with soft bioluminescence, patterns of light flowing across his body in waves. The light wasn't random. It was communication. Varathix was broadcasting in frequencies that most species' eyes could detect, creating symbols that transcended language barriers. He was telling the survivors that help had arrived, that they weren't alone, that someone cared enough to stand between them and death. The transport's remaining crew responded, using their ship's external lights to acknowledge his message. Maya felt Varathix's satisfaction at the connection. He positioned himself alongside the hull breach, extending his wings to create a physical barrier against debris and radiation. The action was completely impractical from a military standpoint. His wings couldn't actually shield the transport, but the gesture's symbolic power mattered. The survivors could see through their viewports that a living being was protecting them. While Varathix maintained his position, Maya launched every repair drone Ashkor had insisted on installing in the Dragon's equipment harness. She had protested their inclusion during initial fittings, arguing that Varathix was a warrior, not a construction platform. Now she silently thanked the training officer's foresight. The drones swarmed over the hull breach, deploying emergency sealant foam that hardened in seconds when exposed to vacuum. It wouldn't hold permanently, but it would buy time. The other 2 transports had less critical damage but were burning through their fuel reserves trying to maintain safe distance from Zithoran patrols. Maya coordinated with their captains via text Wanais Pro. The leash came in the form of a new commanding officer. General Varex was Thalorian, a reptilian species known for rigid adherence to military hierarchy and contempt for improvisation. He arrived at the Indomitable with a staff of 40, all carrying tablets displaying regulations and combat doctrines that Maya was expected to memorize and follow without question. Their first meeting happened in the Admiral's briefing room. Varex studied Maya with golden eyes that held the cold calculation of a predator evaluating prey. His scales were deep green with scarlet highlights that shifted when he moved. When he spoke, his translator rendered his hissing voice into clipped, precise sentences. Rider Maya, your combat record is impressive but undisciplined. You launch without authorization. You ignore tactical parameters. You engage targets outside your assigned operational areas. This ends now. Maya's hands moved in response, her translator speaking for her. My undisciplined actions have saved thousands of lives and destroyed a Zitharan hive ship. Results speak louder than regulations. Varrix's crest flared, a Thalorian expression of displeasure. Results achieved through violation of command structure create precedent that undermines military effectiveness. You will follow proper channels. You will await authorization before deploying. You will operate within assigned parameters. These are not suggestions. They are direct orders. Admiral Kestrix, who had been watching the exchange with increasing discomfort, signed to Maya while speaking aloud. General Varrix has been assigned operational command of Dragon Rider deployments. I remain in overall fleet command, but tactical utilization of strategic assets falls under his jurisdiction. The way she emphasized certain words carried meaning beyond the literal text. She was telling Maya this wasn't her choice. Through the floor, Maya felt Varathix's presence in the hangar 4 levels below. The dragon was listening through their bond, experiencing the conversation through her perceptions. His anger built slowly, ancient and terrible, the wrath of beings who had destroyed empires when provoked. Maya sent calming thoughts through their connection, but she understood his fury. They were being treated like weapons to be stored and deployed rather than partners in defense. Varrix continued, oblivious to the psychic tension building in the ship's superstructure. You will begin formal tactical training tomorrow at 0600. My staff has prepared a comprehensive curriculum covering proper engagement protocols, chain of command procedures, and authorized response parameters. Your previous training was clearly insufficient. Maya stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the deck. She signed with sharp, aggressive movements. My training involved bonding with a war dragon that 17 others failed to even approach. My training happened in actual combat against overwhelming odds. I don't need lessons in following orders from someone who has never experienced what Varathix and I share. The general's crest flared wider, and his hand moved toward the sidearm at his belt. Admiral Kestrix stepped between them, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets before Varrix had graduated military academy. Stand down, General. That's an order. She turned to Maya and signed privately. And you need to calm down before your partner tears through 4 levels of deck plating. Maya felt the truth of that warning. Varathix was seconds away from demonstrating exactly why Korvath engineers had built limiters into War Dragon containment systems. The dragon's rage touched everyone aboard with psychic sensitivity, making them feel phantom pressure behind their eyes. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, sending waves of calm through the bond until Varathix's fury subsided to controllable levels. When she opened her eyes again, Varrix was staring at her with new understanding. Fear had joined the calculation in his gaze. He had read the files about Varathix's psychic capabilities but hadn't truly believed them until now. Experiencing the edge of a war dragon's wrath, even filtered and controlled, was visceral in ways that reports couldn't capture. The general's voice was more cautious when he spoke again. Nevertheless, regulations exist for reasons. The Alliance cannot function if every operative makes independent decisions based on personal judgment. We require coordination and unified command. Admiral Kestrix signed to Maya while speaking to Varrix. Perhaps we can find middle ground. Maya and Varathix will attend your tactical training sessions to ensure familiarity with standard protocols. But they maintain operational independence during active combat situations where immediate response is required. Emergency rescue operations fall under that category. Varrix's crest lowered slightly, a concession. Acceptable. But all non-emergency deployments require my explicit authorization, and I want detailed after-action reports for every engagement. He pulled a data tablet from his harness and placed it on the conference table. This contains your first authorized mission. The Helios station has reported Zitharan scout ships probing their defenses. You will deploy in 48 hours as part of a reinforcement fleet. You will operate under fleet command. You will not deviate from assigned objectives. Understood? Maya didn't sign agreement or disagreement. She simply took the tablet and left the briefing room, her silence more defiant than any words. Behind her, she heard Admiral Kestrix attempting to smooth over the confrontation with diplomatic phrases. But Maya had already dismissed the conversation from her mind. She had more important concerns. The hangar bay felt like home after the sterile conference room. Varathix waited for her, his presence a solid anchor in a universe that seemed determined to complicate simple truths. She climbed onto his back and pressed her face against his scales, breathing in the scent of ozone and ancient starlight that clung to his body. Through their bond came his question. Would she comply with the new restrictions? Maya considered carefully before responding. She understood the necessity of military structure. She recognized that fleets required coordination. But she also knew that regulations created by people who had never bonded with a Draken couldn't account for the reality of their connection. Varathix wasn't a weapon system. He was a living being with 10,000 years of combat experience. Treating him like a missile that required authorization to launch insulted everything he was. Her response flowed through the bond as emotion rather than words. She would follow regulations when they made sense. She would coordinate with fleet elements when coordination enhanced effectiveness, but she wouldn't sacrifice lives on the altar of proper channels. If someone needed help and she could provide it, authorization could follow rather than precede action. Varathix sent back waves of approval mixed with concern. His previous riders during the Korvath Empire's height had faced similar tensions. Military leaders always wanted control over assets as powerful as war dragons. But Draken psychology made absolute obedience impossible. They were engineered to be intelligent partners, not mindless tools. Effective utilization required trust and autonomy. Chains made them useless. The next 48 hours passed in tense preparation. Maya attended General Varex's tactical training sessions, sitting through presentations about command hierarchy and proper radio protocols. The instructors seemed confused about how to train someone who couldn't hear radio communications, but had survived multiple combat engagements through a psychic bond with an ancient war dragon. Their lesson plans, designed for conventional pilots, had no framework for her reality. She learned what she could and ignored the rest. The most valuable information came from studying the Helios Station briefing materials. The station guarded a strategic wormhole junction that connected 3 different sectors. Losing it would force Alliance fleets to take weeks-long detours through hostile space. The Zitharan clearly recognized its value and were probing for weaknesses before launching a major assault. On deployment day, Maya woke before dawn and spent an hour in the ship's small chapel. She wasn't particularly religious, but the quiet space helped her center thoughts scattered by anticipation and frustration. She thought about Lieutenant Chen and the 642 survivors from the transport rescue. She thought about the millions of civilians who depended on warriors like her to stand between them and nightmares. She thought about the weight of responsibility that came with bonding to something as powerful as Varathix. The deployment fleet assembled in formation outside the Indomitable. 27 vessels of various classes. Enough firepower to hold off most Zithoran probes, but not enough to survive a determined invasion. General Varex commanded from the heavy cruiser Relentless, his staff coordinating fleet movements with precision that Maya grudgingly admitted was impressive. Whatever else Varex might be, he understood large-scale fleet tactics. Maya and Varathix took position in the vanguard, ahead of the main fleet elements as was standard for Dragon Riders. The general's voice came through her helmet's text display. Dragon Rider, you are to maintain formation integrity and engage only targets designated by Fleet Command. Acknowledge. She sent back a single-word acknowledgement, the minimum required by protocol. Varathix rumbled beneath her, his amusement at her barely concealed defiance transmitted through their bond. The dragon understood human politics better than most humans did. He had watched empires rise and fall, based on individuals' ability to navigate the gap. The Zithoran invasion of Helios Station came 3 days later, and it came with overwhelming force. Maya woke to alarms screaming through the fleet's network, her display painting space in crimson threat indicators. 17 hive ships emerging from the wormhole, thousands of fighter-class organisms spreading like disease across the system. Biocruisers the size of mountains, their surfaces crawling with weapons that grew and evolved in real time. General Varex had been right about one thing. The 4 scout ships that escaped had reported back to the hive consciousness. But instead of creating hesitation, news of Varathix's deadly efficiency had triggered a massive response. The Zitharan didn't avoid threats. They swarmed them with numbers that turned individual excellence into statistical irrelevance. Maya's hands moved across her controls, checking systems while Varathix launched from the Indomitable without waiting for clearance. The dragon understood immediately that authorization protocols meant nothing when facing extinction-level threats. Below them, The Alliance fleet scrambled to battle stations, but Maya could see they were too few. 27 ships against 17 hive vessels and their countless offspring. The mathematics of survival didn't favor humanity. Admiral Kestrix's voice cut through fleet communications, her words appearing as text on Maya's display. All ships weapons free. Execute defensive pattern Delta 7. Dragon Rider, you are cleared to engage at discretion. Do what you do best. General Varex's channel activated immediately, his translated voice sharp with fury. Admiral, I am operational commander of Dragon assets. That authorization should come from me. Then give it, General. Or get out of the way. The argument was cut short by Zetheran weapons fire that turned the space between fleets into a light show of destructive energy. Maya dismissed the tactical drama from her mind. Leaders could argue about authority chains after everyone survived. Right now, she and Varathix had work to do. They dove into the swarm with the recklessness that comes from understanding that half measures against overwhelming odds are just slower ways to die. Varathix's plasma breath carved channels through fighter formations. His claws tore through biocruiser armor. His tail blades severed the organic conduits that connected hive ship sections. In 90 seconds, they killed 300 enemies and barely slowed the invasion's momentum. Through their bond, Maya felt Varathix's grim assessment. They could fight for hours. They could kill thousands. But ultimately, numbers would overwhelm even a war dragon. The Zethoran had committed forces that suggested they didn't care about losses. This wasn't a raid or a probe. This was extermination. Alliance ships were already taking damage. The destroyer Valiant, which they had saved at Terminus, exploded in a flash of nuclear fire as multiple hive ships concentrated their weapons on its position. The cruiser Relentless, carrying General Varex and his staff, was venting atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches. Fighters launched from the carrier Thunderhead died in swarms, their pilots selling their lives for minutes of purchase time. Maya's tactical display showed the inevitable conclusion. The fleet would be destroyed within 2 hours. Helios Station would fall within 6. The Zethoran would control the wormhole junction and gain access to 3 undefended sectors. Billions would die in the weeks that followed, unless someone did something impossible. Maya felt Varathix's attention focus on the largest hive ship at the invasion force's center. It was 3 times the size of the vessel they had destroyed at Terminus, a living nightmare that spawned smaller craft in continuous streams. That ship coordinated the entire attack. Its death wouldn't stop the invasion, but it would create chaos in the hive consciousness. Minutes of chaos. Maybe enough for the fleet to inflict critical damage before being overwhelmed. The approach vectors were impossible. Too many defenders. Too many weapons. Even Varathix couldn't survive the concentrated fire between their position and that central hive ship. The mathematics were clear. To reach it meant death. Through their bond came Varathix's ancient question. Was it better to die fighting for something important, or live having stood aside when courage was required? The Korvath Empire had fallen 10,000 years ago, but the principles that created it still echoed in war dragon genetics. Warriors existed to protect the vulnerable. That purpose transcended personal survival. Maya sent back her answer wrapped in emotion that needed no translation. Together. If they died, it would be together. And their deaths would matter because they would buy time for others to live. Varathix roared, and the sound carried across electromagnetic spectrums that most species couldn't perceive. It was challenge and promise and farewell simultaneously. Every ship in the fleet felt it. Every Zethoran organism recognized it. The war dragon was declaring his intention, and everyone understood what it meant. They accelerated toward the central hive ship, building to speeds that made their shields blaze white-hot. Zethoran defenders swarmed toward them like antibodies attacking infection. Varathix killed them without slowing, his weapons firing in continuous streams. Maya's plasma lances carved paths through the organic chaos. They took damage. Shields failed, scales scorched. Blood from minor wounds streamed behind them in freezing droplets. Still they advanced, then something changed. Admiral Kestrix's voice cut through Maya's display with 3 words. All ships follow Dragon. The entire Alliance fleet turned toward the hive ship Maya and Varathix were targeting. 26 vessels, battered and bleeding, accelerated into formation behind them. They weren't coordinating carefully or following tactical doctrine. They were simply following the girl and her dragon because sometimes leadership wasn't about authority chains. Sometimes it was about recognizing who was willing to go first into the fire. General Varex's channel activated, his voice transcribed to text that appeared calm despite the chaos around him. "Dragon Rider, this is suicide." Maya sent back a response through Varathix's external speakers, her translator broadcasting to every ship in the fleet. "Then make our deaths worth something." What followed was less a battle and more a collision between two philosophies of war. The Zytheran believed in overwhelming force and inevitable victory through numbers. The Alliance fleet, reduced to desperate remnants, believed in courage and sacrifice, meaning something beyond tactical calculations. They tore into the Zithoran formations like a spear thrown by dying hands. Alliance ships fired everything they had, burning through ammunition reserves and overloading weapons that weren't meant for sustained fire. Varathix became the tip of that spear, his body absorbing damage meant for the vessels following behind. Maya felt every impact through their bond, each one a separate agony, but the dragon refused to slow. 30 ships became 24. 24 became 19. Fighters exploded in brilliant flashes. Cruisers hemorrhaged atmosphere and crew. But they advanced, closing the distance to the central hive ship meter by bloody meter. Maya's vision narrowed to pure focus. She ignored the warnings flooding her display. She dismissed the pain signals Varathix was too disciplined to block from their bond. She had one task: reach the hive ship. Nothing else mattered. Not her injuries. Not the fleet dying around her. Not even survival. Just the target and the determination to reach it. They broke through the final defensive line with 11 Alliance ships remaining. The central hive ship loomed before them, so massive it created its own gravity well. Its weapons fired in continuous streams, but Varathix was past caring about evasion. He simply endured, his Corveth-engineered body refusing to quit until torn apart or mission accomplished. Maya triggered every weapon they had left. Plasma lances fired until their power cells exploded. Antimatter charges deployed in a spread pattern that would make precise targeting impossible, but saturation inevitable. Varathix opened his mouth and released his psychic scream directly into the hive ship's consciousness, a weapon of pure agony aimed at the coordination node controlling thousands of enemy vessels. Then they struck the ship's surface at hypersonic velocity, and Maya's world became pain and fire, and the sensation of Varathix's scales tearing against organic armor. They carved through the hive ship's body, momentum and determination carrying them deeper than physics suggested was possible. Behind them, the antimatter charges detonated in a chain reaction that turned the hive ship's interior into nuclear holocaust. Secondary explosions rippled through connected sections. The massive vessel shuddered and began to break apart, its structural integrity compromised beyond recovery. The hive consciousness that had coordinated the invasion shrieked across psychic frequencies, creating feedback that paralyzed Zithoran forces throughout the system. It was only seconds of confusion. But seconds were enough. Admiral Kesthrix seized the moment with tactical brilliance earned through 40 years of command. The remaining Alliance ships concentrated fire on the closest hive vessels, destroying 3 before Zithoran coordination recovered. Station defenses, silent until now to conserve power, opened up with massive railguns that punched through bio-armor like paper, and through the wormhole behind the invasion force came reinforcements, 43 fresh Alliance vessels responding to distress signals. The battle's momentum shifted with brutal finality. Zithoran forces, leaderless after their central coordination node's destruction, fractured.